Okay, Chapter 7, creating new country. So the Act of the Union brought the two Canada East and Canada West, or Lower and Upper Canada, together. Okay, so with Upper and Lower Canada, which was Upper Canada was Ontario, Lower Canada was Quebec. Okay, um, with the government, they chose equal representative in their government. We didn't go over this, did we? Okay. They chose equal representative in their government, which means Quebec gets 40 seats, Ontario gets 40 seats. Of those 40 seats in Quebec, there were about 10, maybe let's say 15. Can you close the door? If it gets noisy, you can, but um so with Quebec, yes. So I can put it up on D2L and you guys can have it for the final. So questions after. Ontario, write it down. Okay? Okay, well, do your best bet. Now, Ontario will have 40. Okay, Ontario, there's not a lot of French people, correct? So they have 40 English votes. In Quebec, it's 10 English votes, 30 French votes. So with those French votes, or sorry, those 10 English votes, it makes the total 50 French votes and 30, sorry, I'm all over the place right now. 30 French votes, 50 English votes, correct? So most of the French felt like they were second-class citizens, especially because at the beginning, Quebec had more French people than Ontario did. Quebec had way more people than Ontario did. But over the next 40 years or so, or 25 years or so, Ontario started to go up. The Great Migration continued, more people kept on coming over, which means that Ontario started to have more people than Quebec did. So at the beginning of this, Ontario wanted equal representation, which means that each country or each province gets equally represented. Quebec wanted rep by pop, which means that it's representation by population. So if there's 30 people in one class, you get 3 representatives. And there's 20 people in another class, you get 2 representatives. That makes sense? So if the other class jumps to 40 people, they get 4. If there's 100 kids in grade 10 and only 80 in grade 9 and grade 7, grade 9 gets 10 representatives, grade 7 gets 7 or 8, whatever I said. Okay, so you would get 1 person for every set amount of people. So you're represented by your population, not by a set representative.
So if there's like 4 people in the whole country.
There's not 4 people. There's like, let's say 1 million.
Oh, that's too much.
So let's say 100. Okay.
Okay.
So 100. So there's, for every 100 people you have, there's 10 people that get elected to.
But half of us.
That's correct. I'm not sure why that matters.
No, because you said 1 person. You said half.
No, it's set representatives. So it's a set population. Okay. If they have a set population, there's 30 kids in this class. You get 3 representatives. Because we're setting it 1 person for every 10.
Oh,
okay. So in grade 9, they have 100 kids in their class. They get 10 representatives. So grade 9s have a way bigger voice every time we vote, and they say, look, I think everybody should pay $2 every day so that the grade 9s can have free lunches. Grade 7 3 people stick up their hand. They're like, no, this is garbage. This is no, no, no. And the 10 grade 9s go, yes, absolutely. So it's 10-3, it passes. Okay, so it sucks for the minority, but it's better for the whole country, right? Because you're represented equally. Because if you have more people, you have an equal voice. Now, if the grade 7 had 1 voice, grade 9s have 1 voice, it's equal representation there, even though the populations aren't equal. Okay? So, what happened was, because there's 40 seats in each, and 10 of them were English, it ended up being 50 versus 30 each vote. So 50 to 30, and the English kept on winning those votes. So the French were kind of pissed off. So they started fighting for rep by pop because they had more population. 25 years later, Ontario had more population. So they turned around and they said, look, you're right, you're right, you're right. You had the right idea. Let's go rep by pop, rep by pop. And Quebec, of course, turned around and said, no, 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 no. You guys were right. You guys were right. Let's keep it an equal representation. Because if they went rep by pop, their seats would start to dwindle. Right? So when they brought the country together, they decided to go with the Senate as equal representation and the Parliament as rep by pop. So that way Quebec was happy and Ontario was happy. That way they're both happy. They're both going to agree to join the union. Now, the Senate cannot pass bills without approval of Parliament. Parliament cannot pass bills without approval of the Senate. So even though Ontario has 1 billion people and Quebec has 7, the Senate guarantees that the French have 40 seats and Ontario has 40 seats as well. So it always balances out, and the French will always be represented equally to Ontario in the Senate. Now, when it came to the maritime provinces, there were 4 maritime provinces. They each got 10 votes. So those maritime provinces were equal to Quebec and equal to Ontario. Okay, but not totally equal to Quebec and Ontario. Does that make sense? Because in rep by pop, the maritime colonies were a sneeze. They were like 3 people to Ontario's 50, 60. Okay, they didn't have very many people at all. So they were going to get overruled, and that's where the Senate came in and said, look, we're going to balance it out. Because of these checks and balances, it worked out. Now, the maritime provinces benefited quite a bit because in the States at the time was the civil union. The civil union was about slavery. Did we talk about this?
No.
I feel like we did, but anyways. Okay? Slavery was huge in the South because they had the cotton farms, they had all these different farms, and they needed cheap labor to farm this. There was no machines at the time, so they needed labor. They needed people to go through and pick cotton. If they didn't have that cotton, they couldn't. Their industry was going to be torn apart. The price of cotton would have skyrocketed because they would have had to pay for all these people. Okay, so slavery was legal in the South. It was not legal in the North. Abraham Lincoln came down and said, let's make slavery legal across the board. The South rebelled, said, we don't want to be a part of your country. The North attacked them and said, you have to be a part of our country because of crops, because of money, because of all that. They needed the South as well. So they started a civil war, which is a war within their own country. With the South, instead of sailing up the coast for 14 days or 6 days or 3 days or whatever it is, it's way smarter to go up to the British colony of PEI, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, one of those, and attack from there because it's less than a day's journey. So if the sun is shining and the winds are blowing, let's attack because this works. If it's foggy and that's what we want, let's attack. But if you're trying to plan for a foggy arrival 6 days in advance, it's nearly impossible, right? It's just way too hard. So they started to set up in the British colonies. The British colonies of Canada, like PEI, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and not so much Newfoundland, but those guys liked, or they didn't want to support slavery. They didn't want to support the South. The British supported slavery, even though they had outlawed slavery in their own countries and colonies. The reason they supported slavery is because all their cotton for their uniforms, all their tobacco, all their good stuff came from the South of America, the South of the States. So they needed to ensure that slavery was kept so that they could, really hurt, so that they could continue their business interests. Okay? So the maritime colonies were afraid of being taken over by the States because they were already there. And they're saying this would be really easy for the States to take us over. It would be really difficult if we had the railway. If we were part of Canada, we could be defended by that. But that's why they started to join Confederation. New Brunswick and Nova Scotia were the only 2 provinces. New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, PEI were the 4 provinces, 4 maritime provinces. Okay? Everybody understand this? Let me say this again. Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Newfoundland, PEI. PEI and Newfoundland were too far away and it was going to be too expensive for them to build the railway to them. So they didn't want to build the railway, and if they're not going to get the railway, it's too hard to defend, which means there's no point in joining the union right now. The Maritimes also benefited because they could trade to Ontario and Quebec without a tariff, and a tariff is a tax, right? So if you're having free trade back and forth, it helps your potatoes be sold in Canada as opposed to potatoes from Massachusetts or wherever. What do you mean? So Massachusetts would be closer to Quebec,
Yeah.
and so would be cheaper.
So why would they be cheaper? Because they don't have to ship them?
Yes, because you don't have to use a boat, and then the railway, you can just use a quick railway trip. Okay, so the closer it is, the cheaper it is to travel, right?
For cars?
No. It's before cars. The only thing that's invented is the railway. Okay, so it's really the only mass way. You can use a boat, but you're not going to use a boat to the whatever. Okay, the CPR is the Canadian Pacific Railway. So the Maritimes joined because protection. They joined because of the railway and access to different markets and free trade. Ontario and Quebec wanted to guarantee that they had access to a port. The Maritimes don't freeze. The ocean never freezes. You guys know this? I hope. St. Lawrence River freezes. Okay, the ocean doesn't freeze.
No.
So Nova Scotia will always have a port, while Quebec will not have a port. You can't always ship out of there. So they wanted one of those Nova Scotia provinces to join because they needed access to a port. And a port allows them to get to wherever they want to ship to. Okay, so that was really important for them. So they were willing to pay for the railway. They were willing to pay for security and their debts and all that stuff if they gave them access to the port. In the end, Quebec, Ontario, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick were the four provinces that joined Canada. Let me repeat that. Quebec, Ontario, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick were the four provinces that joined Confederation at the beginning. Are there any questions with that? Four provinces that joined Confederation. Yeah? We're going to look over it right now. So you guys know guys know the difference between Responsible government is a government that is responsible to the people. If they vote you in, you have to, if Caitlin votes me in and she wants blue shirts for everyone and I don't give everyone blue shirts, she can not vote for me the next time. So there's accountability there.
So you're a government.
So I would be a representative, okay?
How are you voted in?
So a responsible government, it would be, I would be either appointed to Senate or I would be voted in because of responsible representative democracy. Senate is one branch of government, Parliament is another. Okay? So that's responsible government. That's representative democracy as well.
Oh, this is the person I have. I gotta go my guys. They're going too far.
Just tell me.
It says on page 175, use the RAIN formula to help you bring out as many ideas as you can. So we need to know that.
Show me. Which page? Don't worry about that. So, Ontario and Quebec, why did they want to be a part of Britain? Yeah?
Because they knew that there was extra much for the government to make decisions.
Decisions, yeah, but more importantly? Trade.
Oh, no.
Money, 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 money. It always comes back to money. Britain did not want to be in charge of Canada anymore. They had responsible government to a point, but they eventually got more and more responsible, but they didn't want anything to do with them. They didn't want to be a colony of Canada anymore. So Britain didn't want them to be a colony of Canada anymore. So they decided, look, there's free trade, there's mercantilism, there's manufacturing, all that stuff. We don't need each other anymore. This relationship should be, it's basically, you guys still need your parents, correct?
Not if I'm
When you're 18, do you need your parents anymore?
No, but they still.
So at 18 through 21, maybe you're going to school, you kind of need their help, like it really helped, so you stay with them. Some people, when they're 17, they've got a job and they're doing this, and they're like, look, I don't need your help anymore. So that's what it was. When this country was growing up, it got to a point where we no longer needed our mother country. Okay? And then that's when we started to become our own country. Okay? Yeah.
So on
We talked about defending. Yeah.
on the map, it says there was crown colonies. What's the difference from just a regular colony from a crown colony?
I'm not sure. If I haven't mentioned it, we're not focusing on it.
This is like right here, crown colonies, and like there's that one.
Oh, they're territories, not colonies.
Oh,
So you know Rupert's Land
yeah,
was a you know Northwest Territories?
yeah.
Territories are different than provinces, right? So territories are very different than provinces. Territories have less importance and less stuff like autonomy and all that stuff. Less people usually as well. Okay. On page 160, it told you which provinces joined. This is a great one. What day is Canada Day?
July 1st, 1867.
1867. July 1st is Canada Day. 1867.
It's right here.
1867 was when Confederation happened. July 1st, 1867 was the very first day we celebrated our independence. Okay?
Wait, I have a question. So
What?
why did they come up with Canada Day when it was more so about like Britain and stuff like that? Like it was more so like about like the Britain trading and like Nova Scotia.
Because why is it your birthday when it's your parents that have, your mom that has raised you, your dad that has, helped your mom, and that's right.
So Canada was officially like
Created that day.
on July 1st.
Okay? So, we didn't talk about this. There was some confusion about who was going to do what. Now, if we went to Canada and we asked everybody in Canada, should we have French schools? The majority of Canada would say no. They just want English schools. Quebec wants French schools. So it came down to federal, which are national powers, and provincial powers, which are run by the province. When you go down and you look at this, education, very important that it's provincial. Highways. If I have a highway from Calgary to Edmonton, does that benefit Toronto?
No,
So why are they paying for this highway?
because
So we deal with our own highways. We deal with our own property and civil rights. We deal with our own local works. We don't deal with things like currency, because we have one currency across the nation, right? We don't deal with defense. Post office goes across the nation, correct? Trade and commerce. Imagine if it was free to import a car into Canada, but it wasn't to Saskatchewan from America. Everybody would just import to Alberta, and then it would be free trade across the borders, right? So that wouldn't make any sense nationally to do that. First Nations is not a province thing because often they cover one or two or three provinces. Criminal law, stuff like that. Marriage, divorce, residual powers. Municipalities, courts, provincial and local police are all provincial. But the most important one, education. Education and then healthcare. Okay? And then healthcare, because healthcare wasn't really a provincial thing. It wasn't guaranteed until much later.
but I have a question about
Yeah?
how come